Uh, First things first, if you're here to hear Victor Davis Hanson, you're in the right room. And on a somewhat somber note tonight, we want to, for those of you who know, Rudy Mendoza's mother passed away this morning, so please keep her and the Mendoza family in your prayers tonight. Tonight is hosted by the College Republicans here at COS. Those of you who gave donations at the door, it was free to come in, but we'll certainly take your money. All of the money we raise goes to scholarships, leadership trainings, and speakers like Victor Davis Hanson tonight. The other thing I'd like to point out about the College Republicans here at COS is that we have a 100% track record of getting our College Republicans, those who indicate that they would like to go to a UC. We have a perfect record of getting our students into UCs. So those of you who are parents out there who worry about getting your kids into a good college, send them to COS and give them to me, and I'll get them in. Acknowledge the one of the largest and most vibrant and most successful college Republican chapters in the state, and that includes four-year universities. In fact, the president of the California College Republicans did come through our program here. We couldn't do it without the help of our elected officials. Of course, the one who really helped me get it started was Devin Nunes, our congressman. And since then, David Valdeo, of course, has been instrumental. Many of our kids work for either Congressman Nunes or Congressman Valdeo, as well as Jean Fuller, who's always been supportive. Connie Conway, many of our students have interned for her as well. A lot of our kids now work for Andy Vidak and on the Rudy Mendoza campaign. The supervisors, the County Board of Supervisors, all of the County Board of Supervisors have hosted our kids as interns. And so those of you who know one of our supervisors, pat them on the back and say, thank you. This is the kind of thing that they do, and really without much in the way of thanks, and they do it all quietly. We've had our students work for Tim Ward as well. I think I saw Tim somewhere. There he is. There's Tim Ward right there. And somebody needs to come up here and verify that the next name on my list is actually Marion Hedstrom, who's sitting next to Tim Ward right there. And, oh my goodness, look at next to him is Crystal Irvin, who's also on my list. So I don't know if you know who these people are, but there are just some wonderful people in Visalia who really make it possible for us to do what we do here and be so successful with our College Republican chapter. It really is a testament. And, 1,000 little things, that Marion Hedstrom has done for us over the years really has meant a lot to us. People like Gail Knuckles, who, always push for scholarship money. So, with all that said, I should probably to hear me speak tonight, right? So I'll say this by way of introduction. And the American Revolution was a conservative revolution. The colonists fought to preserve rights rather than to them. Revolution created a nation based on the idea that legitimate governments exist in order to preserve individual liberty. Constructing states to answer the question, not being to govern themselves by the question of choice, or whether they were forever destined to live the government created by accident and force. But that's what only elective citizens conservative truth that politics is the success of a society. And the danger of having, as we have, an ideological nation state is that the state, if so we created this lecture series in order to promote a culture that values our liberty, to begin this lecture series. This is a series of lectures that we hope to continue over the next, well, we have speakers lined up for the next 6 years. So I got a lot of old friends. Be transferred from generation to generation. We do here at StephenT. The nature of man doesn't change. If he knows the necessary sensation from himself, the legacy of the West is the guidance system, is natural peril of human behavior. I've known Victor Davis as a professor, mentor, and friend for almost 2 decades. In addition to his academic accomplishments, his commitment to life, I know that he's someone who also creates and secures cultural influence, stability. He does this by actually treating everyone he meets with kindness, generosity, and humility. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the great.
Thank you very much. You know, I did a radio interview and somebody said, what are the most beautiful cities in the world? I have to take a group to Europe. And so I said, Trieste, Venice. And I said, Hanford, Visalia, and Kingsburg. I didn't mention my hometown. But I've always been a big fan of, I always was a big fan of Visalia, and especially Hanford and Kingsburg. Very beautiful. We're very lucky to live where we do for all of the misapprehensions about the San Joaquin Valley. We live in one of the most beautiful areas in the world, which is the topic of what we're going to discuss tonight. I've never done this talk before, but I thought I would try to do the impossible. Talk about a drought, rivers, and then go up to California politics and end as the drought as a metaphor of what's wrong with this country. And we'll see if we can do it in 35 minutes. First thing to remember before we start is that we have never been in a situation we are this spring. We have had 2 and even 3-year droughts. There was a period in the 1920s when our 150 years of record keeping in the Sierra tell us, remember there's only been 150 some years, that it did not snow one time for 2 years. So this is not necessarily completely new territory, a 3-year drought. But what is new is this. We have never in the history of California had a drought for 3 years when there has been 40 million people. Keep that in mind. And we have never had a drought where we deliberately violated the spirit of what our forefathers had envisioned with the California Water Project and the Central Valley Water Project. Remember, the message was, and you can go to their original documents that lay behind, whether it's Henry Huntington's Big Creek Project or the Hetch Hetchy Project or the Colorado River diversions to Los Angeles, or as I said, the 1940s Central Valley Water Project, or the big California Water Project of the 60s. They all have 4 reasons. 1, flood control. That makes sense. Remember, Reedley used to be flooded by the melting rivers before 1953, 54 in the King River. The second was hydroelectric power. We sometimes forget that the Big Creek Project that was started by Henry Huntington in 1912, which gave us Huntington Lake, and then a few years later Shaver, and eventually Florence and Edison, and that supplied half of the power for Los Angeles and created a power system. So there was, now it still creates 1,000 megawatts, hardest working water in the world. That was the second reason why we have this vast infrastructure in California. Third was recreation. I mean, no offense to Visalia, I love the mountains up here, but there was something about the artificially created lakes on the San Joaquin, when you have Huntington and Shaver, that have more recreational possibilities. As politically incorrect as that is to say. And then fourth, of course, was irrigation, bringing in 5 million acres of the best farmland in the world. There's only one place like this in the world. That's maybe to Chile in the Andes Mountains below a hot climate desert-like area, maybe the Andes Mountains in North Africa. But the idea that you would have this towering range with all this gravity-fed water and this fertile soil, it doesn't make sense. And yet, when our ancestors came here in the late 19th century, they quickly sized up California and they came to the following conclusions. Given the climate, the weather, the topography, the 1,000-mile-long coast, the natural riches of timber, soil, gold, precious minerals, later gas and oil, the great ports of San Francisco, the Port of LA, San Diego, a lot of people would always want to come to California. No matter how much we men screwed it up, human people would still come. That's true today. After all, given the way that California is run, there should be no reason why anybody wants to come here. And you're all in the audience who all at some time have thought maybe you should leave. It's not a silly idea when you have the highest gas taxes in the United States, and you're rated by Forbes magazine as having the 49th ranking roads. Think of that. Or you pay the highest sales taxes in the United States and the highest income taxes, and your schools are rated 48th in math and science. In California, the rule is the more taxes you pay, the more you're guaranteed worse service. A lot of people will leave, but they don't. And our ancestors understood this. So the next thing they understood was, unfortunately, 80% of the people would want to live where 20% of the water. And that is, from Sacramento south, the climate was more hospitable, there were more natural resources, and people did not want to live in the beautiful, rainy, humid north. And therefore, three, you had to do something about that. Because people would come, and they would come, and they come, and they wouldn't have any water. California was not sustainable. So when the population was 4 or 5 million people, they quickly understood that where we are today did not have enough natural rainfall at 8 to 10 inches a year. And so, as I said earlier, the first big project they did was the Colorado diversion for Southern California. There was no environmental movement. There didn't need to be. There was only 5 or 6 million people in California. The second big one was, I think it's the most interesting, and that was Henry Huntington, the nephew of Collis Huntington, the Big Four, one of the so-called robber barons. Remember, in 1911 and 12, and this is very important for our current crisis to keep in mind, the San Joaquin Power and Light Company had tried to go up in the San Joaquin River and use a turbine to create electricity for the new community of Fresno. And they couldn't do it. Mr. Eastwood was a brilliant engineer, but he couldn't do it. The reason he couldn't do it is he noticed there was a boom and bust cycle of water. That is, on wet years, the snow melted, it cascaded down this very steep western slope, it flooded Fresno, and by August or September, the water was basically gone. And in dry years, there was no water at all. So when he built his turbines, they either were washed out in June or July, or they ran out of water. Think of this, because we were diverting the San Joaquin River on the theory there was always 15,000 salmon that every year went from the Pacific Ocean to the Sierra. Well, we can thank that and we can dream that because somebody like Henry Huntington built reservoirs to store water so they could be released. So the first time in eons, the San Joaquin River would have a steady flow, quite unnaturally so, every year, which is what we have today. So when people talk about diverting 20% or 25% of the storage capacity of our irrigation water for the restoration of the salmon, they don't tell us, we'd like to use your artificial, politically incorrect reservoirs because they store water in drought years, and before we had those politically incorrect reservoirs, we didn't have any river to sustain salmon, but thanks to you, we can now be more natural. That's what the market is. So Henry Huntington went up there, and with $40 million of his own money, of course, he hired Mr. Eastwood to design it, and of course, as we know in the robber barons, he fired him and took his money away from him. But he, sheer genius, John Eastwood created Huntington Lake, Big Creek Power Project, Shaver Lake, Florence Lake, Edison, and then the dams and smaller reservoirs in the San Joaquin, and then Army Corps of Engineers, Millerton Lake. And the result was that we not only have guaranteed water supplies for the Fresno area, we have hydroelectric. Southern California, Edison still ships at 1,000 megawatts in part to LA, but part to the areas in here as well. And we have this recreation, and it was a great project. Nobody in their right mind thought that we were building those reservoirs in 1911 onward so that someday a botanist or biologist from Stanford or Berkeley would take the water and go file a lawsuit to overturn contractual obligations, so that Henry Huntington was actually building things to store water, to let down the river, not for recreation purposes, not for flood control, or not for irrigation. But that's where we are. The second big idea was how to get more people in California water who didn't want to live there. And the answer was you had to go to Northern California to get it. And the first big project was the federal Central Valley Water Project, mostly agriculture, less than residential, but by damming the Sacramento, the Federal, the American rivers, and we have these famous names, Shasta Dam, Trinity Dam, we were able to take 4 million acre feet and bring it down the Sacramento River, bypass the Delta, and then go into Mendota and open up 4 million acres of agricultural land. The federal government more or less gave up on that project when it was about half completed. The state water project then stepped in the 60s, late 50s. Remember who the Attorney General of California was, who saved the California Water Project for agriculture, and who sued the Sierra Club, who tried to stop it in 1958. Jerry Brown's father, Pat Brown, Democrat Attorney General, saved the California Water Project. We had the San Luis Dam, we had another 4 million acre feet. They opened the west side, they had the Triumph Turn Canal with that water, and pretty much the world as we know it today exists. But the problem is the world that we know it as it exists today, as envisioned by our forefathers, was not static. They knew that when they built these projects at 6 and 8 and 10 and 15 and 20 million, that we would get to 40 million people. I think they might even know that the more affluent and leisured people are, the worse they become. With material progress comes moral regress. So they thought, maybe in their darkest thoughts, I'm going to have a great son that's no damn good and is going to screw this project up. So I'm going to err on the side of safety, and I'm going to bring in 20 million acre feet. So even if they have 5 years of drought, they can't screw it up. So if you look at the original California water project, it's actually staggering. I'm not sure I agree with it all, but I mean, if you look at what they had envisioned in the 1960s and 70s, they were going to draw the Willamette River into the Alpine Reservoir. It was Alpine Reservoir, the largest lake in California except for Lake Tahoe. 15 million acre feet, 15 pine flats, 30 Millerton Lake, and that's the reservoir system alone. And with the Sacramento Styles project, the Los Banos Grande project, they were going to get an additional 20 million acre feet. This was all scheduled. The first dam of phase 2, the New Malones Dam, remember that was a big controversy in Lake 70. It was built in '83, and that was the end of it. The California Water Project allowed some new dams, the Los Angeles Water, but we have not ever gone to phase 2 and phase 3. They were all held up in court because the environmentalists made a compelling case, a logical case. They said that even though we have 23 million people in California, we wish it would look like it did when we had 5 million. We're going to stop everything. And I don't care how many people we have in the 80s and 90s and keep $150,000. We're going to at least have California look like it does in 1983 forever. And they stopped it. And we were okay for a while because we have a drought every 4 or 5 years. We have half a million people every year, so we went to 30, 40. We got through these series of droughts. But then, like a perfect storm, all of these things happened to us this year. We had not built a new reservoir in the Sierra since 1983. We never built a Temperance Flat reservoir above Millerton. We never built the second San Luis reservoir at Panos Grande. We never, as I said, went up to the Klamath River. We never enlarged the storage capacity for wet years in the Sacramento River. And we could get by okay if we had a 1-year drought. But historically, we have a 2 to 3 year drought, anywhere from every 25 to 50 years. So the second cloud came, and that was we had an extraordinary drought. And we didn't build expansion. And the third nail in the coffin, to mix metaphors, was that we had 40 million people now. So what does that mean? Well, in this process of not completing the California Water Project and the Central Valley Project, people went ahead. There were still not 40 million people. So people on the west side, under the auspices of globalization, they saw that India now had a consumer class. China had a consumer class. South Korea had a consumer class. Japan had a consumer class. When I was growing up, everybody said, if you have 200,000 acres of almonds, the almond market's going to explode, forget it. And when we had 400,000 acres, they said, if you ever have 400,000 acres of almonds, the price is going to go down to $0.25 a pound. And we had 600. Now we have almost, 900,000 acres, and the price of the farmer is $3 a pound. And we could diddle this with pistachios, even raisins. I grew up getting $400 a ton for raisins. I got $475 a ton of raisins in 1983. I never dreamed it would be $1,600, $1,700, which it could even go higher, I suppose, given these new economies in the Pacific. So agriculture is booming. It's one of the few things that the state has not been able to screw up. $70 billion and $20 billion in export cash. And people, if you go down Manning Avenue or you go out to the west side, you see that they did something that perhaps nobody really envisioned initially when phase 1 was suspended and phase 2 and 3 were never developed. They started planting capital crops, pistachios and almonds. They've got hundreds of thousands of acres. But unfortunately, as you know from the hydrology of the San Joaquin Valley, you guys are lucky. I'm lucky. I live in Selma. There's a great engineer, Amy Tillman. He wrote a manifesto understanding California water in the 1950s. I wish you could look it up. He was a brilliant man. I met him once. And he charted the aquifer. And he says the strangest thing in the world. The water comes off the Sierra in the clay soils of Greeley or Orange Cove. There's not a good aquifer. When it gets near the 99, Kingsford, Visalia, Salmon Fowler, it goes into a deep reservoir, hundreds of millions of acres feet of water. And then somewhere around Highway 41, it starts to go down, almost like a waterfall. And it drops about 100 feet per mile. By the time it gets out near I-5, the water table can be 1,600 feet. And if you have a 500 horsepower and a pump on the west side, you'll get no more water per minute than a 10 horsepower here. So farming was not economical unless you had canal water. And the second problem was, as these farmers started planting almonds, they discovered that almonds can't exist on well water with the types of salts and chemicals and naturally occurring in this very different aquifer, and they had to mix it with canal water. What am I getting at? This is the first year there's going to be no canal water, and everybody is going to be pumping, and the almonds are going to be the first thing to go because they cannot tolerate that type of pumping. So we're going to see capital investments of $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 an acre ripped out. We're probably going to see 200,000 to 300,000 to 400,000 acres of land not farmed, and we're going to see billions, not millions, but billions of dollars diverted from the California economy. Even while we still, let's be honest, the environmentalists did not cause this damage. They just, through 30 years of blocking every attempt to build additional phase 2 and phase 3 contractual, pre-planned, and scheduled additions to our water projects, and the recent diversion for the Delta smelt and the San Joaquin River salmon, they ensured that we didn't have a safety valve, any margin of error. So this year we're going to pay, there's going to be higher food prices for people in the Bay Area especially. There's going to be water rationing for people in the Bay Area. And we're going to see a crisis that California agriculture has never seen before. And more importantly, we're going to have an Armageddon specter for the fourth year. Because if it doesn't snow, or we will have a fourth year drought, and there's some indication that may have happened in the past, then we're going to even be affected here because we have so many straws and a sinking level of water in one glass. And we're starting to see people deepen their pump. I'm a member of the Consolidated Irrigation District. I have a beautiful payer tax. I haven't had a drop of canal water in 3 years. That's the same for all of you, mostly. So we're all pumping. We've never tried that. We've never done it for a fourth year. So we're going to be confronted with the wages of environmentalism. And those are considerable wages. I mean, we laughed at, we were told that wind turbine and solar mill farms are the way of the future. And then we learned that they're incinerating birds or destroying hawks, and that's kind of bad and funny, but that's a minor little contradiction. We've never seen anybody's philosophy of radical environmentalism, radical utopianism, this reactionary idea that you're going to create a paradise of California about 1910 in a modern industrial exporting globalized economy of 40 million in 2014. Nobody in their right mind ever thought they'd actually try to do it, and they did it. And so we're right on the cusp now. Which brings me to the second part of our evening's discussion, and that is, why do they do these things? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Everybody, we laugh at it. It doesn't make sense. Everybody knows that it'd be nice to have salmon, but it's nicer to have communities of people. And everybody likes nuts and oranges better than they do looking at fresh salmon, and things change. But why do they do these things? Before I answer that question, they do a lot of these things. Think about it. We're a very funny state. I don't think we're California at all. I think we're half Massachusetts and half Mississippi. If you look at California's population and per capita income, just think of a 10-mile strip, sometimes expanding 30 or 40 miles from San Diego to Berkeley. Then all the rest of us in between. Northern California, Sierra, the San Joaquin Valley, Inland Empire. I mean, that's where the money is. A Japanese study just rated the 20 top universities in the world. The top 17 were American. But this is what gets interesting. But out of the top 10, 4 were in California. And 5 were in the top 15. Caltech was number 1. Stanford was 3. Berkeley was 6, UCLA was 8, USC was 16. They're all on the coast. Remember that. I mean, even the CSU system, what I taught in the flagship CSUs where the money was always CSU, San Francisco, not Fresno, but Rock or Bakersfield. All the nice UCs, everybody wants to go to La Jolla, Santa Cruz, or Berkeley Hills, or Irvine, they don't want to go to Cal State instead. And we were the working class muscles. We were the place where the agriculture, the oil, the gold, the minerals, the timber was from. But the processing and the merchandising and the profit making has always been on the coast. That's where Safeway's headquarters, that's where PG&E's headquarters, that's where Bank of America, that's where Transamerica, they're all there. And it's this corridor that creates fabulous amounts of wealth. So much wealth, getting back to our initial statements, we can't screw it up. Even 2/3 of the legislature that we have, and get Governor Jerry Brown, they cannot screw it. And Napa Valley feeds, now it's the world's leading, by sales, wine region in the world. That capital goes through San Francisco. Silicon Valley, Apple Incorporated the corporation is the second largest capitalized company in the world. $75 billion in cash on hand. We see Google, Apple, and Hewlett Packard, and Facebook all within a small radius. You can see why 1,200 square foot home across from my little tiny studio apartment in Palo Alto that I use during the week is going now for, I think it's $2.1 million. There's so much capital. That's where the universities are. That's where government is. And they've created a culture. It's not connected to California. It's connected to any part of the United States except one corridor between New York and Washington, where the conditions are similar. And the mentality that has developed is, I have sort of transcended the traditional limitations on the human experience. I being coastal California, I being, this is what they think. I don't really care if we have the highest gas taxes, because I don't drive much. I don't have an old Yukon trying to get to Mendota to work. I have a Prius and I putt from, Menlo Park to Palo Alto. That's what they think. I don't really care. I make $500,000 at Facebook, or I make $150,000 to start at Bank of America, or I have a home. Suddenly it was worth $1 million 1 year, and now it's worth $1.3 million. So they feel that they're exempt from the ramifications of their own ideology. Their ideology affects you people and me, but not them. For them, high taxes, open borders, green power, bait fish in the Delta, these are all psychological mechanisms that make them feel good. But they don't have to live the ramifications of actually enacting them. I've been very fortunate in my life because I get up in Selma, out on Mountain View Avenue, and Selma, its per capita income is $16,000 per year. Fresno County is the second poorest county in the state, and southwestern Fresno County is the fourth. And then I drive 3 hours out Manning Avenue up to Chico Pass, and I get to my apartment. I work at Stanford University, and it's one of the highest, 110,000. So it's over 6 times wealthier. The unemployment rate in Palo Alto is 3%, in Selma, 17%. And as I look around and I see all the crazy things that go on in my community, all of them were thought up by people in Palo Alto. But here's the difference. They don't have to live with any of the consequences. I'll give you a few examples of what I mean by that, so I'm not just talking in abstraction. Let's take water. Let's say you were a UC biologist at Berkeley, or let's say you were one of the Steyer brothers, who now have pledged $100 million to be used for green candidates. One of my colleagues at Stanford University, Mr. Steyer, is a professor there. He's a great venture capitalist. Okay. So you have all these ideas about diverting water from the San Joaquin River. Do you ever go to San Joaquin? No. I ask these people every day, have you ever been to Mendota, 5 Points, you're on your own? No, never been. Okay, and I say, and then my next question is, where do you get your water? You ever heard of the 1920s Hetch project? No. And I said, your city and your area burned down in 1906. San Francisco earthquake fire, and they didn't have enough water to rebuild it. So brilliant people fought whom? John Muir, the icon of the environmental movement, founded the Sierra Club. They went right into, these were Bay Area liberals in the 20s, they went right into Hetch Valley, was supposedly, John Muir said, was prettier than Yosemite Valley, and they dammed the Tuolumne River. And the result of it is they built a 160-mile aqueduct, 4 big things. You can go see it on the Dunbarton Bridge. It's gravity fed. It's the most brilliant engineering feat of all of the engineering feats I've listed before. It is so brilliant that the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir and Dam provide a large city of well over 2 million people in the South Bay and San Francisco, all the way down to Palo Alto and parts of San Jose, with water that does not have to be treated. It's the only pure water at Granite Lake, gravity fed, comes right in to San Francisco. If you've seen the Crystal Lake Reservoir in 280, we're in a drought. Has anybody seen that lately? It's filled full to the brim. Full to the brim. It's beautiful. No swimming, no fishing, nothing. It's San Francisco and South Bay water. Now here's the trick though. A key point, it crosses the San Joaquin River. So if you would say to people who thought up this idea of letting water out of Millerton so that salmon could get to the Sierra, or that there would be more water to flush out the municipal waste from Bay Area communities in the Delta, why don't you just take Hetch Hetchy water and stop it at the San Joaquin?
and it's poured into the San Joaquin River. Now, it might help salmon get a little boost to get halfway to the and better yet, it would give enough water to flush out those awful toxic waste you guys are defecating into the delta and is hurting the poor little 3-inch bait. And they said, what do you mean? And I mean, well, instead of getting 98% from an artificial water project, why don't you just divert it like you diverted everybody else's water so that you can, recycle wastewater in San Francisco and have rain collection on your roof, and then we can experiment with, oh no, we can't do that. This is Google, this is Apple, these are world practices in agriculture. Think of that thinking that goes on. And if you think of that, California then is Mississippi and Massachusetts, but it's explicable. Take power. I'm always told by people in Palo Alto that power rates don't matter because we are doing a lot of green, and we have about 2% of our power now is solar. 3% is wind. We're leaders in that. I said we have the highest power bills in the nation, and yet we have the largest now, even more than the Dakotas, the largest natural gas reserves in the world. We could put natural gas generation plants right above the fracking points on the other side if we wanted to. We still make 10% of our power is clean hydroelectricity, thanks to our ancestors. But here's the thing. This a person in Sanford told me the other day, I don't ever turn on my air conditioner. You don't turn on your air conditioning because you don't have an air conditioner in your house. Because like me, who has an office on the top floor of the Hoover Institution, there is no air conditioner. Because in August, I open my window and it's 73 degrees. As I said to him, you should go to the Selma Walmart. Selma Walmart, here's what you see. You see poor people from Mexico who bring their children and they sit there because they cannot afford to turn on that power because in one day they would get a $20 bill. $600, $700, $800 a month. So I said, basically, you're very elite people who have mandated the most expensive power in the nation because you live in a 700-mile coastal corridor that has a 65 to 75-mile temperature ideal climate. Again, you're not subject to the ramifications of your own crackpot ideas. If we take fuel, California is still the 4th largest oil producer. We have the 2nd largest oil reserve, and with fracking, we have the largest natural gas. But if you live in a narrow, dense corridor, you're not driving from Visalia to Fresno, or from Visalia to Tulare, or across out to San Joaquin. So, of course, you get in your Google bus and gentrified San Francisco. Private bus, remember, people who are big supporters of mass transit have done something very interesting, as you know, in San Francisco. They decided, very liberal people decided there are just too many people who work on public transit. And you can't go into Google and Apple in the morning if you smell like mom. And they're just not nice people. So we're going to have our own plush luxury buses pick us up in our own gentrified neighborhood. Very funny to watch. Very left-wing people have exclusive private buses, pick them up in the morning to drive their Palo Alto to Menlo Park. Mass transit. Mass transit is the best thing in the world except for us. We want private coaches. Touching on mass transit, of course, they thought up the idea of high-speed rail. And they said, you got to have high-speed rail. And some of us said, you said it, I said it, we all said it, but people got sick of listening to it. Utopianism is the next step. Before you become a utopia, you do the basics. You don't build a vast house unless you have a foundation. The foundation in California is called the 99, 101, I-5. When I-5 is 3 lanes, when 99 is 3 lanes, and when 101 is 3 lanes, and they're safe and they're not killing people in places like Delano or out near the Monterey Peninsula, then we can dream about utopia and mass transit. So we have not changed until recently the 99. Anybody knows if you go from Delano to Kingswood, it's like road warrior. It's one of the most dangerous areas in the world. You're lucky not to run over a lawnmower or 2x4. I came to Selma, I ran over a ladder today. aluminum ladders sitting in 2 or 3 of them, truck of them. And I taught at Pepperdine this year on Mondays, and I would leave on Sunday nights, and I'd say, in a normal, sane place, 212 miles should be 3 hours. That means it will probably be 6, because you never know what you're going to see on the 99. And you never know now on the I-5. You don't have 101, it's not even a freeway. Well, why didn't we do that? Because people in the Bay Area and the coastal corridor said that they wanted mass transit. Fine. You also wanted, you know, all this wind and solar. We got the high power bills in the hot climate and the cold climate. And you also wanted salmon jumping in some river we paid across the valley. So we can predict what happened. They decided that they did not want mass transit built in their corridor, at least first. They wanted to see how it worked. So as I say to my Stanford friends, well, why didn't you build it from Pacheco Pass to San Francisco where all the traffic was? Everybody confused it. Well, you know, we had to have it in a tunnel, a subterranean tunnel. We don't want to, you know, be dirty and messy building and construction and disruptive. I said, well, what do you think it's going to do? Well, there's not very many people down there. I said, there's some of the most majestic oaks in the world. That corridor is beautiful. So you're going to go in there and you're going to destroy miles, hundreds of acres of fine farmland so somebody can go from Fresno to see Charles Manson and Corcoran in what, 5 minutes? You can just go down the 99 freeway on 3 lanes. You don't want to do that, let's beef up the existing Amtrak. But why do we need a 3rd way that will destroy majestic farmland that was the floodplain of Tulare, from Tulare Lake, and it was the most beautiful area in the world? We're destroying it. And we're destroying it because people don't want to do to us, to themselves. They don't like the idea of destroying habitat, except if it's for somebody they think is less civilized, culture, wealthy, whatever the particular ism or all it is. And that's what's wrong with California. If we look at water, if we look at energy, if we look at mass transit, if we look at any other issue, take the final and the most controversial of all, illegal immigration. I'm a big supporter of legal immigration. I think that's what makes the United States so wonderful. But I'm a big supporter of ethnically blind immigration based on meritocratic criteria. You have a skill, or you have some education, we want you, but I'm not a fan of illegal immigration. However, I can imagine that the law, for a variety of reasons, was not enforced. Fine. Everybody screwed up, so to speak, if I can use the vernacular. So let's have a particular compromise. Let's say if anybody's been here for 5 years, they're working, they've not been on public assistance, they can have a pathway to citizenship. And I mentioned to my Stanford colleagues, no, we have to have a blanket amnesty. I said, okay. You know that 45% of school children in California in the public schools, their first language is not English. And while we are great supporters of multiracialism, we're trying to absorb, as we always have in this country, one culture and many races. So we're trying to take people from everywhere, we're trying to teach them English, and we're trying to make them competitive. So when you say that you want open borders, we can't assimilate 300,000-400,000 people, and it's going to fall most heavily on Mexican-American kids who are not going to have competitive schools like the ones in the Bay Area. But here's what I'm getting at. The people in Silicon Valley, to take one example, are doing something that nobody's quite seen before. They are sprouting private academies like you wouldn't believe. There used to be Castellea and Menlo School, and now Menlo School is gigantic, and Castellea School and Sacred Heart, and they're everywhere. It's like we're on the East Coast with prep school. They're sprouting everywhere in the Bay Area. And as I said to a few of my colleagues whose kids are in them at $30,000 a year tuition, I said, you guys remind me of the old Southern racists that when they desegregated the schools in 1965 in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, all these private academies sprouted up. So what's the big deal? Well, there's no big deal. I said, you support open borders. Why are you doing this? Menlo Atherton used to be one of the best public schools. Oh, used to. You know, Victor, that they don't offer Mandarin Chinese anymore. Mandarin Chinese? How possible City problem. What's the Redwood City problem? Well, what they were trying to tell me, these are very liberal people. They're trying to say that a lot of Mexican American or illegal aliens, or whatever term we use, are doing the service, the hard work of nannies, landscapers, cooks for Silicon Valley techies. And they like that. That's why they like open borders. But they do not like those people after 5 o'clock in the afternoon or before 6 in the morning. So when Redwood City got big, people started to go to minimal advocacy. And as soon as that happened, the most liberal people in the United States who voted in the last election, 70% for Barack Obama, said, we're going to yank our kids out, and we're going to pay $30,000 so we can have our excursion schools. And if you don't think that was beneficial, if you say to them, my colleague at Stanford, Tom Stoll, and I were talking not too long ago, why is it that somebody who's very poor, who makes $12 an hour, is living 30 people to a home in Redwood City, right in the middle of Silicon Valley? So we were thinking of this, and some of you have been on 280 from Sand Hill Drive in Palo Alto all the way to the Hetch Hetchy Crystal Springs River. It's empty, isn't it? Beautiful 280, right along the side of the Silicon Valley. Perfect place to put mass transit, high-density eco housing, right? Why couldn't we get the state of California and the techie industry to say, you know what, we're not going to do people like that in Redwood City. We're going to build 200,000 affordable housing units with mass transit, affordable to people, the Hetch Hetchy water right along the 280. What do they say? Yeah. Not in my bag. Not in my bag. We're not going to do that. I had talked to them. You know, Victor, I have a polo. We're in the polo club. We have 5 acres of polo ground up in Woodside. We can't do that. You know what a Woodside home is today? $20 million. Where would we do that? We destroy our property value. Where would these people go? I said they would go to your house to work for you. Let me tell you by trying to suggest that this is what we're experiencing in the smaller issue of water and the larger issue of the state. It's being malgoverned, if I could use that term, and then nationwide. And this is the crisis in the next 2014 midterm election and the next presidential election. Somehow, the conservative, Republican, traditional, you can multiracial, whatever your race or your class, nobody cares, but if you have an ideology that you think the United States does not have to be perfect to be good, this is a crisis because the old Democratic Party, many of you like me were Democrats, maybe, my parents sure were, but they were Democrats because they wanted an 8-hour workday, 40-hour work week, overtime, equal opportunity for housing, non-discrimination. That agenda was met. And then the next agenda was utopia. What we see now with salmon and taking from agriculture, high power bills for eagle-eating turbines on Montana, or Google luxury buses while mass transit is carrying on Oaks here so we can go to Corcoran. Not that I don't like Corcoran, but what I'm getting at is what we're struggling against is a new elite. I'll give you 3 or 4 examples. Al Gore is our premier leftist guru. He reminds me of the ancient Roman demagogue Crassus. Crassus started fires in Rome. That's why he was important. Marcus Licinius Crassus was the wealthiest man in Rome because he lit a fire, then he showed up with a fire engine. He said, how much? Al Gore convinced everybody that the world was burning up. Whatever global warming is, it hasn't happened in the last 17 years. It may be going on, but whatever the status is, he said that we were going to be destroyed in a generation, and he made $1 billion out of it. Offsets these companies, etc. The problem with that is Al Gore at one time had the highest per square foot usage of electricity in Tennessee. Al Gore owned a bankrupt current TV cable station. He knew the capital gains tax was coming up in 2012. He knew that it had no market value other than an anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynist Middle East company called Al Jazeera that wanted entree into the cable market and would pay $100 million for a working station. And so he rushed to beat the capital gains tax and added advertising taxes, sold it to Al Jazeera, and the money came from what? The government of Qatar, who made it how? Selling carbon, fossil fuel, petrodollars. That's what he stated. That is our modern emblem and icon of radical environmentalism. His partner is the Steyer brothers, the so-called left-wing Koch brothers. Where do they make their money that they have $100 million to go against conservative candidates? They made it in coal plants and fossil fuel burning plants in Indonesia. Elizabeth Warren has weighed Massachusetts senator, and she's touted as perhaps a rival to Hillary Clinton. You know her because she said she was Native American. Remember that? Why did she say it? Because of the racist thing that I have high cheekbones. She put herself down as Native American and got special compensation for that, not worrying whether other candidates who didn't choose to do such skullduggery were hurt by it. But nevertheless, she's campaigning against the 1%. These are the people who make over $250,000 a year, she thinks, and they didn't build their businesses. She created that phrase, not Barack Obama. You didn't build that. The problem is that she has a net worth of $15 million, and she and her corporate lawyer husband made $1.4 million. Are we to take her seriously when she indicts people that make $200,000 in a tire repair shop or a paving company because they're so-called elites? No. She's as bankrupt as Al Gore is on the environmental issue. Last week, Barack Obama, who has said, you didn't build that, jet owner, corporate jet owner, fat cat, at some point you made enough money, now is not time to profit, spread the wealth. You know the whole litany. Last week, he had 30 people who were going to inherit $1 billion in the White House. The next generation called it. Young trust fund babies, 18 to 25. And he was trying to get them to become good, liberal, democratic donors. There was no talk about, he didn't say to any of those people, you didn't build that. At some point, you guys have made enough money. Now's not the time to profit. Don't put your money in stocks. He didn't say any of that. What am I getting at? And what I'm getting at is that when people call people racist or sexist or polluters or whatever term they do from the Democratic elite, the Democratic Party is run by people who have made so much money that they're exempt from the ramifications of their own ideology, and they try to force their ideology on other people. The $64,000 question is why? And I think, one, there's two reasons. One, because they can. Because they have enough money to insulate themselves in prep schools or Google buses or whatever it is. They never feel the ramifications. And two, it's sort of a psychological recompense. You know, in the Middle Ages, as a historian, we always laugh that if you wanted to say in the 15th century, let's say you were a wealthy Florentine banker that heard that the big Cathedral of St. Peter's was going up in Rome, and you felt bad about your money lending, lying, cheating, and killing. You went to the pre-Reformation church and you said, I got a deal. If you write an exemption and penance for me, write it out, that you forgive me for everything, I will give you 3 marble blocks for the dome. And they did. They sold them. That was part of the reason Martin Luther went reform us on the church. Well, that's what the left is doing now. They're saying to us, I feel really bad about the money I've made on this capitalist system and how I inherited or made it or globalized hedge fund or whatever. I feel so bad that I'm not going to give up my home. I'm not going to give up my Mercedes and Lexus. I'm not going to give up my Gary and Cobble house. I'm not going to take my kid off Sacred Park and live with the hoi polloi. But I am going to do something symbolic on somebody else. And that's going to be my exemption. And if I can have just the thought of salmon jumping again in the river, or I can think of maybe a high-speed transit just a little bit more, then I'm on my way into secular liberal capitalism. And I'm free of all sin and wealthy, snooty, right? That seems simplistic. Let me finish, but what do you do about it? What you have to do is you have to say to yourself, first of all the names are going to call me, they don't have an ideology. This is just a personal fashion, hip, coolness fad that they're in, and it's not going to have any effect on them. And second, we have to be the movement of people. The middle classes, the lower middle classes, the upper middle class. They're not the representatives of the people. So we need to, it seems to me, nominate, I thought Mitt Romney would have been a wonderful president. I thought he was a lousy candidate. I thought John McCain would have been a mediocre president. He was a lousy candidate. And they were easily carried. When they asked John McCain how many houses he had, he couldn't remember all 11. When Mitt Romney, I said to myself, they're going to do Mitt Romney what you won't believe. When they got done with Mitt Romney, he had an elevator in his home. His wife was guilty of being an equestrian, and he didn't go out and have coffee with his garbage man. He seemed like he was, Prince Charles. We need to get somebody who shows the strain and the toil and the wear and tear of what it's like to be an American and has suffered the ramifications of their own ideology. And if we can do that, I think we can reinvent the conservative movement as a real representative of America and expose the people who are running this country, not as liberals or progressives, but as hypocrites. And not just hypocrites, but downright nasty. Thank you very much.
Very enthusiastic college Republicans who are distributing and collecting note cards. If anybody has a question for Dr. Hansen, please write it on a note card, and one of these young people will pick it up and be reading it. I promise I'll read anything. Do you have questions? Do you want to have any questions? First of all, I guess for the audience, what do you think it was like to sit there and just seminar? It was pretty special. I guess when you were talking about an elite, I guess I was drawn back to this kind of Jeffersonian agrarianism of all things, thinking about maybe Jefferson, father of agrarianism, but also a bit of an elitist himself, who pretended to be mainly for people. I know that this, by the way, I think he's a little more of a Jeffersonian, I'm being more Hamiltonian myself, so I'm trying to load you up and shoot me down. So tell me why I'm wrong.
We use the word elite. It's a natural elite. We all can be elites. All of us can improve our grammar, we can all read, we can all do music, we can appreciate. I just went to one of the best productions I've ever seen of South Pacific Ware in Selma, the new Selma Arts Company. It was absolutely brilliant. I've never heard anybody sing Some Enchanted Evening. If I were to go to my San Francisco friend and say, if you really want to go see a good production of South Pacific what I'm saying by elite is not the real word elite. We all try to find elite areas where we have standards and we have aspirations of excellence. I've seen elite tractor drivers that can drive 15 hours in a massive 265 and not even touch a vine. It's an art form. I can see irrigators who can just turn on a valve at the exact right twist and send it a quarter mile down without stopping. So elite means excellence in a person's desire to achieve. What it does not mean is a social convention or a psychological mechanism. And the thing about what's good about America, what I like about America, what we like America, when I go to Europe, I do 3 or 4 times, what I don't like about America. Europe is that Americans were practical people, and they lived the life they advocated. So we didn't have a hereditary aristocracy. There's nobody whose name is Lord somebody and Duke this. Or we don't have these honorary titles, Marquis with Talma. We were self-created people. And when I go to Europe, the first thing a European journalist will say, I had a Swedish journalist at my home yesterday, they always ask you the same thing. Where'd you go to school? You own land? What'd your parents do? And I said, that's really stupid in Europe. What we do in America is put money in it. Because that shows you that you have a sign of success and it's not aristocratic. It may be crass, but we are a meritocratic society, and I think that's what I like about America. So, what I do not like about the elite left wing is that they're trying to create an aristocracy of Harvard, Yale technocrats in this administration, or people that work and say, I work at Google, and therefore I can outsource or I can offshore money as Google and Apple do, but I'm exempt from ramifications. I'm Jay-Z. I'm cool. I can wear a big medal that has the 5% Nation of Islam radical racist ideology. I can wear it around because I'm not a racist, but I'm cool. That's what I don't want. This self-appointed elite thinks that they can act in a certain way or promote a certain image that makes them immune from what the rest of us have.
Well, we have quite a few questions here about, this is just a stack on one question, so I should ask this first. And that is, what do you think about the idea of dividing up California into separate states?
I'm trying to be very short we get to the quick I think it'd be a great idea, at least in thirds, and I see zero chance of it happening.
So we've got two questions on presidential candidates. I'll try and combine both of them. One is a little more open-ended, just who you think would be a good presidential candidate. The other one, a little more leading, establishment Republicans. Hey, what? No longer seem to represent us. Oh, that's not nice. The question, is it time for a third party? And this person says, I'm not going to vote for Christie or Jeb Bush.
Well, I think everybody understands that, although in the abstract, Jeb Bush might be an effective candidate, we've had enough Bushes. We've had enough Clintons. We don't want to have Bush versus Clinton again. This is not European political dynasty. So we need fresh blood on both sides. As far as the establishment, I think that we need to get new people into the establishment rather than create a third party. There hasn't been a good record. Unfortunately, as a historian, I look at third parties and I see even the most successful usually damage the party that was more ideologically akin to them. So I was skeptical about George Bush Sr., but I thought that he was much better than Bill Clinton, and also Thoreau destroyed his chances. And I could adduce other examples. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to pressure the Republican establishment. And I'm as big a critic of that New York, Washington corridor as anybody. But we have to get good candidates. We can't get people who, we have to get solid candidates. That's very important.
And Chris Christie?
There's every reason I should like him because he doesn't look like your blow-dry politician. I've heard him speak a few times, and I forget about all this current problems he's going, and forget about why people like him, that he can be a conservative so-called in New Jersey. I just find him off-putting. I've listened to 3 lectures and met him in person. He's the most narcissistic, self-referencing.
Broader question. How can so few control so many?
It's called oligarchy. Mostly the power of the media, because everybody says, well, everybody polls more conservative, 45% of Americans are conservative. The polls all say that we're conservative, 45% and Ripple's only 22%. What the polls do not tell you is, let's take the 5 most influential areas of the American experience. A, the media, mostly liberal, if not all of them, except for Fox News. Maybe questionable on most things, but most of the mainstream, what they call. And B is academia, most professors are 90% liberal. Hollywood and entertainment, the foundations, big foundations, the Gates Foundation, the Butler Foundation, Guggenheim Foundation, they're all liberal. And it seems to me that the entrenched bureaucracy, what do I mean by that? The people who work for the IRS, the Bureau of Land Management, regardless of who's in power, federal employees that are unionized. So that's a very influential number, a very small number of people. And how do you change it? You're going to have to change the universities, you're going to have to get counter media, you're going to have to boycott these crazy stupid movies that they put in Hollywood, and we're going to have to limit the size of the federal government. That's why they so few answer that question. That's why so few have so much power.
I'll ask you this one, Kevin. By the way, I talked about Davis Hanson's kindness and generosity. One of the things that he asked to do when he came here was he wanted to meet with COS students directly. So we had arranged a meeting for Dr. Hanson and COS students. So he met privately with just a small number of COS students this morning, or this afternoon. And given something that came up in that conversation, I wonder if you would talk about Christopher Stevens, which is the subject of this question. He was a rising star politically, and how did you feel about his demise?
I can't think of, when I think of something like Benghazi, I just say, okay, George Bush is president. He's running for re-election. He's told the world that Al-Qaeda is on the run, and there's no terrorist threat. We have cables from his ambassador in Libya, please give me some security because terrorism is a threat. The night that this compound is stormed and the ambassador and 3 other Americans are killed, Mr. Bush goes to bed at 8:30 because he has a campaign stop the next day in Las Vegas. And then he sends out Condoleezza Rice, security advisor, or maybe John Bolton is UN ambassador. John Bolton is UN ambassador. He sends him out to tell all the networks 5 different times that a video maker was responsible for a mean video, and then he sends the video maker on minor infractions and jails him suddenly for 1 year. If George Bush did that, there would be calls for impeachment. So I think it's a crime. I don't think we're going to know the full story. It's all explicable in the 2012 election cycle. The mantra was, GM is alive and Bin Laden is dead. That's what they said. And Al-Qaeda is over with, and we got this video maker did. He's right-wing, he's a nut, Coptic right-wing guy, he did it. And now we got him, it's all over. I met Chris Stevens, I had a ruptured appendix once in Libya, and when I woke up after a near-fatal experience, he was in the room, but this young attaché was trying to open an embassy in Libya. This is the nicest guy in the world, now he's dead. The tragedy is not only is he dead, but his death was preventable because he wrote cables of Hillary Clinton's staff saying, this is not safe with radical Islamic terrorism. A stone's throw away from this compound. Why didn't they help him? Because they had a narrative that there was no problem in Libya because we led from behind, we got rid of Gaddafi, it's a paradise, we're behind the Arab Spring, it's going to be democracy, and we've got to round up all of these weapons and put them on Turkish freighters and send them to the insurgents in Syria. The CIA didn't want anybody to know that that's what we're doing. It might have been a good idea, it might have been a bad idea. That's what we're doing, that's why they got killed.
Briefly, I guess, comment on the Bundy BLM and jurisdiction on public lands.
Yeah, I wrote a couple articles on that. The whole question is, you and I do not care what Clive and Bundy's theories are on transgender restrooms. I don't care. All I know is that 82% of the land in Nevada is owned by the federal government, A. And B, this family had a contract with the state of Nevada for generations. And C, he probably let cattle wander from state land onto federal land. And D, that became very important because of the tortoise. And C, he was in court for 20 years trying to adjudicate it. And E, he probably should have just paid the fine. And F, you don't need $25 million worth of SWAT equipment and material to go make an example of this guy. And F, if you go get anybody in the Nevada desert who can scratch out a living from cattle, and you're a New York Times reporter, and you stick a microphone into his mouth and say, "What do you think of food stamps?" You're going to get some bizarre answers.
Good general question. What do you find to be the best way to research current events?
You know, I try to do, each morning, I try to read, I know it's painful, I don't try to subsidize it, but I try to look at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and then a nutty left-wing review, and then National Review. Or I try to get to see what's going on with the mind, the trajectory these people want us to go on. So I think that's important. And then I think it's also important, every day of your life, you can, even if it's just a 2-line poem from Kipling or Keats, or a little bit of Shakespeare, you have to read something that's divorced from the 24-hour news cycle. Because what education is, you're trying to make sense of this daily barrage of stuff, and you need context. Some of the context of your life, you know, if you're a nurse or a teacher, you can use that experience to make sense. Say, that doesn't make sense. We won't do that at the hospital. But some of it has to come from abstraction. So you got to say, Obama thinks he didn't say that. He didn't invent that. That's been said since Sophocles' time. He didn't have that abstract. So I try to read things that are not just news, history, literature, and then I try to draw on as many different experiences. Because if you just insert yourself into this Fox, MSNBC, internet chainsaw, you can't make sense of it.
So, studying the humanities still have some value?
Absolutely. Education is a Latin word, and educare, it means to lead you from one place out. And what it was based on was two things. We had to have a principle. The principle was we have to teach you to be empirical, which is a fancy word to be inductive. That means that when you see A happen and B happen and C happen, you come up and say, this fits the example. And you do not be deductive. You do not say, I like Barack Obama, and then every single thing he does must be good. You say, this was bad, this was bad, this was good. 2 out of 3 was bad, I don't like Barack Obama. That's inductive. And that's the half of education, but it won't be any good if you don't have any realm of reference. So you want to read as much literature or history or drama or play music that gives you something that you can say, wow. When I was young, I had a mother who read a lot, and I said, wow, it's so weird, I'm dating this girl, I'm only 16, and the nicer she is to me, the nicer I am to her, the meaner she is to me. And my mom goes, you think that's ever happened before? Read Sophocles or Homer. And that was a human tendency, and when you know that you're not alone in the world, literature makes you not alone.
It's hard to read the handwriting here, but it's how much of a gauge of the popular vote is the Electoral College? Can you comment on it?
Well, I'll just mention that the founding fathers didn't trust you or me at all. They thought we were a mob, and on any given day, 51% of the people are capable of killing Socrates and Jesus, as you know. So they had all these bizarre things in the Constitution. The first senators were not elected by popular vote. At first, you had to have some modicum of property before you could vote. And then we had this bizarre idea that you had 2 senators from every state, even though Montana, each senator only represents about 300,000 people. In California, they represent 20 million. And the Electoral College is an example of not having a direct vote, and that means that Obama or Romney has to go campaign in places like Montana or Wyoming. If they didn't have an Electoral College, it would be New York and LA. So I like any of, I mean, we lost most of it. We lost the appointment of senators, and I don't think it's right to make sure everybody has to have 5 acres before you can go to a house. there is something to say. But I do think the Electoral College is really valuable, and 2 senators in the state, every state.
Why do, there's a reference to a specific water decision in Fresno that was overturned. Why does the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals keep overturning water cases?
You know, in the case of the judiciary, I'm speaking as a son of the first female Superior Court judge in Fresno County, and the second woman appellate court. My mother, Pauline Hanson, was a judge, appointed by Harry Brown. I grew up meeting a lot of judges. I think there's something about law school in general that lawyers are more liberal than the House. And I mean, they're always at war with private enterprise. And then the judiciary are the theoretical people. And some judges were wonderful, but what's happened, I think, in the last, especially with Bay Area and federal judges in general, we've got a lot of people who came straight out of Bowl Hall or Hastings or Stanford Law School or whatever, and they went right into government, and they've never been in the private sector, and they are in a social class. Most of these courts are in big cities, and they don't have any personal affinity with people not of their own class, or they don't have any personal affinity with the consequences of their decision. For them, it's an abstraction. It's like a professor. Tenured professor goes in, I was a tenured professor. You go in and say anything and you feel bad about a bad day, but it's not like farming where if you screw up, you put gasoline in your diesel tank your whole day. I've seen a lot of professors who've done the equivalent of a farmer putting gasoline in a diesel tank and nothing happened. So there are no consequences to judges or professors, any of these tenured federal or state positions.
I'm sorry, I just got this one, so it's jumping in line. But have you ever met an individual who started as working class and later chose to be educated in life and become successful?
Started working class? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know.
Other than me.
I think, I know a lot of people that started as working class. And you know, the funny thing is that I go to New York a lot, and I meet a lot of people who are traders on the Wall Street. You think they're grandees. They're not. They're working class, mostly Italian and Irish guys. They go into Wall Street, and they're the muscles of Wall Street. And they bark and yell on the screen, and they make fantastic amounts of money. And when I've spoken to a lot of these very wealthy farmers, and some of them inherited it, some of them had it. And not that inherited wealth is a bad thing. So I think only in this country is there social mobility. When we talk about the 1%, what the president doesn't tell us is that the 1% is 175,000 to 400,000, which is a lot of money, but the people in that 1% category are only there about 5 years. You don't just suddenly at 30 make 200,000, then you make it till you're 70 and you die. You're working hard and you do extra jobs and you connive and you do everything, and then maybe you get a promotion and you're 55 or 58 and you're made a president of a college or you're made a regional distributor or Ace Hardware, and then you die. Not the people with, the businesses I sell you and do pretty well for 5 or 6 years.
We have 2 questions now. Just generally, what do you think of the Common Core?
My problem with Common Core is, it should be Common Core. I've always supported that. But my problem is that when academics say that they believe in conservatives and want everybody to have a shared experience, I get very skeptical because they've never done that. When I start looking at the text that they want to mandate, they have a theme that's sort of race, class, and gender victimization and complaining. If you look at a lot of the Common Core text, they're not the type that are going to encourage people to expand their vocabulary or their literary or musical appreciation, or they're not going to be reading necessarily great works of art. Looking at literature, there are some in there, but there's too many things that are designed for contemporary, desired therapeutic progressive result.
Well, I actually did look at the Common Core standards for K-12 for history, and the actual standards are fine, but the text and the people who are implementing it, that I think that's the problem. And in fact, I mean, I'm sure if Professor Hansen and I sat down and looked at the questions that they're asking for history, standard stuff, you know, the World War II, you know, but it's when you start looking at the textbooks that it gets problematic. Yes, I'm sorry. I spent all day reading those standards. How do we get politicians back to the basics of doing their jobs, running the government?
Well, I've been asking that question 2,500 years. I don't know. You know, this sounds perverse, but when I see a local politician, and I ask them, at what degree, I ask myself, at what trajectory in their career are they being corrupted? I look at their appearance a lot, and the way they treat people. And if I see someone, I won't mention names, if I see someone that, how do you do this, you know, and they're just this, I tune them out. I like people who look and talk and act the way they did when they went into office. I know that's a very unscientific when you go to Washington or New York and you look at some of these people, especially Washington, they just look and act it. They don't look like the rest of us. And something's happened and they went into some machine that turned them into a lab panicking, you know, empty, sloganeering, sermonizing. Nobody. They always believe in what 51.2% of people think. Well, you're always thinking, where am I going to land next? Well, I like people who don't worry whether they're going to be thrown out of office because they have another life. They have a life, and they can go back to it, and they look as if they have a life.
And if you ask David Valadeo about policy, he'll tell you it's archery. By that standard, I think we've got the two best congressmen that a lot of people are doing Valadeo. What is the prospect of a water bond initiative passing the November ballot?
It depends on how severe the drought is. I think if the Bay Area people are showering with gray water all summer, it's a good chance.
Why does the EPA not seem to have any checks and balances?
Well, it's the same thing as professors and judges that we just talked about. There's no consequences. You can make $150,000 in the EPA, and you can swagger into John Harris's meat, this self-made business, and you can say, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you've got enough power to do it. In fact, more power, because if you file a legal lawsuit against them, or a big grower, or anybody, you have unlimited legal sources. You can break it. You can go in. I remember the Southwestern plant when I was in high school. They just went in and said, we're going to check this and this, and he fought them. That's what's scary about this new government. We have all of these people with bachelor's degrees who are technocrats, and they have the power of this vast legal framework, and they threaten to cite you, and that means that they get free legal stuff for you. So then you settle it. It's scary.
Here's the person who disagreed with that guy. How long until all of our resources are used? NASA says we have 15 years until all of our resources are gone, and we will have economic collapse. Is that possible?
Well, unfortunately, I heard that from Plato. What peak oil was, I grew up on peak oil. The year was 1974 when the oil reserves went down. So I think the key is not natural resources per se, as long as you don't damage them beyond the air. We're all conservationists, but the human mind is very ingenious, and it's going to go beyond solar and wind. And these are the issues of our time, and gas or hydrogen, or who knows what fusion energy will give us. But the key is you have to preserve a free-thinking society where people are encouraged not only to speak freely and to have dissent, so they don't believe in global warming, prove it. You don't shut them up. And then there's a free market economy where they can profit. There's an incentive to be ingenious, and Edison or so we don't know what the next power source or how houses are going to be built, and they may be built out of waste materials. But we do know that if we follow a model like iron it's not going to be good. It's not the, it's not the pump, it's the essence, it's the water that matters. And that's,
We got to go into the lightning round here, get them out of here by 8:30. Let me combine these two. How do we get the poor or minorities to understand their conservatives? And given the changing national demographics, what do you think about the possibility of ever electing another Republican president?
I think it's 50-50. I think a lot of what's going to change when the Democratic Party says get over it, the demographics are changing. What does that mean? Does that mean that my brother who has 2 Hispanic children that are half Hispanic and they're going to have a little badge that says 50% this, they're going to wear it? Or I have another brother who's married to a Hispanic woman from Mexico. Does that mean that he's anti-Hispanic or pro-Hispanic? So everybody in this audience in this multiracial society has all sorts of different ethnic people in your family. And this new democratic idea that we're going to hyphenate you and you forever are Hispanic, and you're forever black, and you're forever white, it's irrelevant. It's becoming mixed up. What are you going to do? You're going to say that the Hispanic legislator said, you know what? We want to bring back racial preferences in UC. And then the Asian legislature said, no, we don't. Otherwise, the Asians were, and then Hispanic, like, well, you're 4 times represented in the UC county. And they said, what do you mean represented? Well, it's based on, there's so many groups. It's not just 10% of the population is black, and it's 90% is white. We're all mixed up. And so the Democrats have this dinosaur fossilized category because they want to slice it up and say they don't like you. And then we're going to rebuild you to 51%. But I don't think it's going to work. I think people are ultimately, race is incidental. It's not essential. I don't want to live in a world, I don't think we do either, where we're always identifying with our race. It just seems so childish. And I think the Democrats have really regressed on this. They're going to regret it because intermarriage and assimilation and integration are reinventing the idea of race. We saw that with Elizabeth Warren. She's going to be our first Native American president. What's that mean?
Yeah, this is the last one, and it's one I think you feel comfortable knocking out of the park. What great city-state do you think the Valley seems most like? What does the Bay Area seem most like?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but we're not Athens. But we're not Sparta either. Sparta was a militaristic, progressive state. I think we're Thebes. My favorite city-state was an agrarian democracy. And what I liked about it is it was not pretentious, and the redistributive socialism that Athens ended up as, and which destroyed Athens. And it wasn't a hierarchical reactionary caste system, but it was a flexible society where everybody participated, and it was agrarian. It wasn't a big municipality, and I think it not only produced some great Greeks from Plutarch and Pindar, but it lasted a long time, much longer than Athens and Sparta. And with that, thank you very much.